When it comes to cybersecurity, there's this fundamental truth, that often gets pushed aside. Building impenetrable walls, it just isn't enough. So what if you knew, like truly accepted, that no matter how many digital defenses you put up, determined attackers will eventually find a way in? Welcome to our deep dive into network security monitoring, NSM for short. This isn't really about stopping attackers right at the gate. It's more about building this robust security net, to detect, contain, and control them once they're inside. Our mission today, to give you a shortcut, basically, to understanding NSM's core principles and how it works in practice, we're drawing heavily from Richard Bechlich's seminal work, The Practice of Network Security Monitoring. You'll leave here better informed, hopefully, and ready to think a bit more critically about your own digital security posture. Okay, let's unpack this idea. Richard Bechlich, he's got serious credentials, CSO at Mandiant, former IR director at GE. He opened his book with this really powerful statement: prevention eventually fails. If we truly embrace that, really take it on board, how does that fundamentally change how we approach security beyond just adding, more layers?
Well, it's fascinating because traditional defenses think firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, AV, DLP, DRM, they're all basically blocking mechanisms. Their job is to stop the bad stuff at the perimeter. But the thing is, a determined attacker, given enough time, enough resources, they will get past them. So the core NSM philosophy, it completely shifts the focus. It says you operate as if your enterprise is always compromised, because let's be honest, it probably is or could be at any moment. It's about accepting prevention alone isn't enough. Instead, NSM is grounded in this idea. Knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied.
So it's less about chasing perfect prevention, which sounds kind of impossible anyway, and more about accepting the reality of compromise and then actually doing something about it.
Yeah.
That feels like a major mindset shift for a lot of places.
Exactly. Kevin Mandia, Mandiant CEO, he calls NSM an invaluable resource for anyone detecting and responding to security breaches. And that really contrasts sharply with the whole magic box solution some security vendors push, right? Which often just leads to this false sense of security. NSM is about adding a robust layer of protection. It's there to detect, contain, and control intrusions, not just try to block everything up front. For, let's say, more mature organizations, the shift isn't just trying to stop intruders anymore. It's about detecting them fast, responding efficiently, and containing them thoroughly to limit the damage. And why should you, the listener, care? Well, ultimately, NSM is about preventing the loss of your sensitive data, even when those attacks are, frankly, inevitable.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. This whole concept of monitoring, actively hunting for intruders inside your network isn't brand new, is it? Where did it actually come from? How did it sort of evolve into the NSM we're talking about today?
Yeah, you're right. It's not new. The roots go back quite a way to pioneers like Todd Haberlein in 1990 and even Cliff Stoll's work back in '88. They were actually favoring simpler, cheaper, more reliable detection methods over these really complex, maybe brittle, expert systems. There's this great anecdote actually from the early days involving DISA, that's the Defense Information Systems Agency. An organization was complaining their systems were constantly saturated, just barely functional. They were ready to spend a fortune on a much bigger, more powerful system. But then DISA came in, deployed an early NSM sensor, like a prototype, and they found that something like 80%, 80% of the connections hitting that supposedly saturated system, they were from attackers. The system wasn't overloaded by legitimate work at all. It was being hammered by malicious activity.
Wow, 80%. That's a massive blind spot to uncover just by actually looking at the network traffic. So how did these early, maybe scattered efforts, how did they formalize and become the foundation for what we do today?
Well, these early monitoring systems, they definitely evolved. You had things like LLNL's Network Intruder Detector, or NID. The Air Force had a SIM, the Automated Security Incident Measurement System. DISA had JIDES, the Joint Intrusion Detection System. Then, by the late 90s, you started seeing commercial products pop up: NetStalker, NetRanger, Real Secure, names like that. And alongside that, a really vibrant open source community grew, contributing tools like Snort, which many people, still use or are familiar with today. Richard Bechlich's own system, NetLumen, was actually a precursor to a lot of the designs and concepts he lays out in his book. The whole trajectory was about moving from just reacting, cleaning up after the mess, to proactively detecting threats as they happened.
Okay, so NSM has this rich history, evolving from simple observation to these pretty sophisticated systems. What does that mean for the data itself, though? What kinds of information are NSM pros actually looking at day to day to spot these intruders in the wild?
Right. So to detect and respond effectively, you need different views, different kinds of data. Each gives you a piece of the puzzle. First up, you've got full content data. Think of this as the raw network packets, the complete, unfiltered conversation happening on your network, like a wiretap. You use tools like TCP dump or Wireshark to capture and look at this. It lets you see everything that crossed the wire.
So that's the ground truth, the complete recording. What about, I don't know, more summarized versions? That sounds like a lot to sift through.
Exactly. It is a lot. So building on that, you have extracted content data. This is where tools automatically pull out higher level things like files being transferred or web pages being loaded, emails maybe. Think Explico or NetworkMiner. It lets you see specific content without digging through every single packet, like maybe a suspicious PDF or a weird image file. Then there's session data. This summarizes conversations. Who talked to whom, when they talked, and how much data went back and forth. Tools like Argus do this, and this is incredibly efficient storage-wise. Argus data can be like orders of magnitude smaller than the full packet capture. Gives you great context without the massive storage need.
Okay, that makes sense for getting a broader view. What about understanding the intent behind the communication or spotting bigger patterns?
Good question. That's where transaction data comes in handy. It captures the gist of a conversation. Think logs from something like Bro, now known as Zeek. It might show you specific HTTP GET requests or DNS lookups, what actions were actually taken. Then you got statistical data. This looks at aggregated traffic characteristics like total bytes over a certain port or the distribution of different protocols. Kipinfos or Wireshark stats can show this. A sudden spike might be suspicious. We also use metadata. This is information derived from the traffic, but not directly in the headers. Things like, say, the geolocation of an IP address, or its autonomous system number. You might get this from external lookups, like using RobTex. And finally, critically important is alert data. These are the explicit warnings, the indicators of compromise generated by detection engines. Think intrusion detection systems like Snort or Suricata, or even host-based IDs like OSAC or network profiling tools like Preides. These alerts pop up in NSM consoles tools like Sguil, Squirt, Snorby, ELSA, giving analysts that consolidated view of potential threats. It's really the combination, the fusion of all these data types that gives you the power to see the full picture.
That's a lot of different data types to juggle, but I can see how they create a powerful toolkit when used together. So how do we actually put this into practice? You mentioned Richard Bischlich's book highlights Security Onion as a key tool. How does someone actually deploy and manage an NSM platform like that in a real-world network?
Right. Deploying something like Security Onion or any NSM platform really involves some crucial planning. The absolute first thing is visibility location. Where do you tap in? It's paramount you capture the right traffic. The book uses this great example. Imagine a typical corporate network using Network Port Address Translation, NPT. This basically hides multiple internal private IPs behind one single public IP address when they talk to the internet. And this raises a really important question for you, the listener. If you're only monitoring outside that translation point and you see malicious traffic coming from your single public IP, how do you know which internal computer is actually compromised? You can't see the true source IP. So the book emphasizes placing your sensor strategically inside the network at points where you can see those true internal source IPs, locations G, B, and H in their example diagram.
Ah, okay. So placement is key to actually seeing the real internal activity, not just the masked external view.
Got it.
What about the physical connection? How do you actually get the traffic, and are there specific hardware needs?
Exactly. For the physical access to traffic, the general preference, and what Betrick strongly recommends, is using network taps. Taps are generally seen as more reliable than using span or mirror ports on switches. They demonstrate a real commitment to visibility. Span ports, well, they can be misconfigured, they can get oversubscribed and drop packets, or an intruder could even potentially disable them. Taps avoid those issues. In terms of hardware, yeah, you need reasonably beefy systems. Think large hard disks, probably in a RAID configuration for redundancy and performance, especially for storing that full content data. You need a good amount of RAM. The book suggests a minimum of 4 gigs plus maybe 1 gig per interface you're monitoring, and enough CPU cores to process all that traffic, maybe 1 core per monitored interface as a starting point.
Okay, so you've got the right location, the right physical connection with a tap, and the right hardware. How does the open source Security Onion suite actually pull all these monitoring capabilities together then?
Security Onion is really designed to make this easier. It offers 2 main deployment modes. First, there's the standalone mode. It's basically a self-contained single box solution. Everything runs on one machine. This is great for learning NSM for smaller networks, Or if we're just getting started, you can see all the data types and learn the workflow easily. Then for larger or more distributed environments, there's the Server Plus Sensors mode. This is a distributed platform. You have specialized sensor boxes out on different network segments, maybe even in different geographical locations. These sensors collect the data locally, full content, alerts, session data, etc., and then they securely send it back to a central server for aggregation and analysis. They can even connect back over VPNs.
And beyond that initial setup, does Security Onion help with the day-to-day stuff? Like managing all that data, keeping things updated?
Yeah, it aims to streamline that too. Installation is often pretty simple, especially using the .iso file method, which feels familiar if you're used to installing operating systems. For ongoing maintenance, you use standard Linux update commands, sudo apt-get update, and dist upgrade to keep all the components current. Security Onion also comes with sensible default firewall rules, acceptables, to protect the NSM platform itself, only allowing necessary traffic for management and data collection, like SSH, syslog, and the console interfaces. And crucially, it includes automatic storage management. Scripts like isaptem sensor clean run regularly to delete the oldest data, usually full packet capture first when disk usage hits a certain threshold, like 90%. This prevents the disks from filling up completely, which is vital for continuous monitoring. Then, all those different NSM data types we talked about earlier, they get fed into various web-based consoles integrated within Security Onion. You've got Sguil and its web front end, Squirt for alert triage, Snorby for another view of alerts, and ELS for powerful log searching across billions of events, especially useful for digging into Zeek logs. ELSA can even pivot directly to the full packet capture related to a specific log entry using a tool called CapMe. It really ties everything together into a cohesive ecosystem.
Okay, it sounds powerful in theory, very comprehensive, but how does this actually play out when, the wolves are actually in the sheep pen? Let's dive into some concrete examples from the source. How does NSM help unravel a real security breach?
Absolutely. Let's walk through two scenarios described in the book. First, a classic server-side compromise. Imagine NSM sensors first pick up reconnaissance activity. Maybe PID alerts showing scanning from an external IP address targeting a couple of your internal systems. That's the first warning sign. Then maybe Snort fires an alert for a very specific, unusual FTP login attempt against one of those internal servers. It uses a strange username like 0M and a password as. Correlating this with session data and maybe transaction logs reveals that the successful login to a VSA PTD server actually exploits a known vulnerability, opening a backdoor listening on, say, port 6200 TCP.
Okay, so NSM gives you the early recon warning, the specific exploit details, and the backdoor creation. What was the impact? What did the attacker do next, and how did NSM track that?
Well, the impact was exactly what you'd fear. A command and control channel, C2, was established over that new port 6200. What NSM analysis revealed next was critical. A different attacker IP address then connected via SSH to the already compromised internal server, using that foothold. They proceeded to access sensitive data, in this case, a database archive, my.sql ssl.tar.gz, and then uploaded it via FTP, not back to themselves, but to a third external system, 2AO 3.0.113.4. Data exfiltration. Tools like TCP flow within the NSM suite help analysts reconstruct these file transfer sessions, proving the data left the network. And what really stands out here, and the book emphasizes this, is the power of using multiple NSM data types. Sometimes initial logs might seem confusing or out of order, but by going back to the full content data using T-Shark, analysts could confirm the true sequence of events, unambiguously showing the recon, the exploit, the C2, and the eventual data upload.
That's a really clear chain of events showing how they got in and stole data. Okay, what about the other side of the coin? A client-side compromise where maybe a user clicks a bad link or opens a malicious file.
Right, the client-side compromise scenario is also very common. This often starts differently, maybe with a user reporting something strange happening on their machine after visiting a specific website, say 2.0.13.13.15. An NSM analyst might start by querying the logs in LSA for traffic involving that user's IP or the suspicious website's IP. Immediately, they might see indicators of Metasploit activity, things like interpreter sessions being established, core channel traffic, and Snort might fire alerts for known web browser exploits. Now, maybe the initial automated analysis by Zeek missed some details, perhaps due to inspection failures on tricky traffic. But because the full content was captured, maybe maybe by net sniffing, the analyst can rerun Bro against that PCAP file to generate complete logs after the fact. Argus session data would clearly show the victim's machine first connecting to the malicious website on port 8080 TCP in the example, and then shortly after establishing a new persistent connection to the attacker's C2 server on port 44444 TCP.
And what did the attacker manage to do through that compromised user machine? What crucial insights did NSM provide into their actions after the initial infection?
This is where analyzing the C2 traffic becomes vital. Using CAPME to get a transcript of that C2 channel, the connection on port 4444, revealed the actual commands the attacker typed. Things like netconfig interfaces to see the network setup, get Reid to find out the current directory, basic recon inside of the compromised machine. But then, critically, the transcript showed the attacker deploying and executing a shell script named keylog.esh. This script started logging the user's keystrokes to a hidden file in the temp directory, a classic way to steal passwords or other sensitive input. And NSM didn't stop there. It also showed the attacker pivoting from that first victim machine, 170.116.0.37, using SSH to connect to another internal system, 10.0.0.9, effectively spreading laterally within the network. These examples, they just really hammer home how NSM isn't just about if you got hit, but about understanding the entire attack lifecycle, how they got in, what they did, where they went next.
Yeah, those are seriously chilling examples. They make the whole prevention eventually fails mantra feel very real and show just how critical NSM is for understanding what happens next. What stands out to you in these scenarios? Like, what are the key takeaways for our listeners about actually analyzing these kinds of complex attacks effectively?
Well, connecting it back to the bigger picture. Even when you have great tools like Security Onion and you understand the data types, real-world networks throw curveballs. There are practical challenges NSM analysts constantly grapple with. Two really common ones the book discusses are network proxies and checksum issues. Network proxies, the ones many organizations use for web filtering or caching, they can really muddy the waters for NSM. Because the proxy sits between the user and the internet, the NSM sensor might only see the proxy's IP address talking externally, obscuring the true internal client IP. Now, there are things like the x-forwarded4 HTTP header that can help reveal the original client IP, but it's not always present or reliable, especially if you have chained proxies. Visibility gets tricky.
Right. Proxies masking the real source. I can see how that's a problem. And checksums, I thought those were just for making sure data doesn't get corrupted in transit. How do they cause issues for NSM?
They are for error detection. But here's the wrinkle. Many modern network interface cards, NICs, use something called checksum offloading. Basically, the NIC itself calculates and inserts the final checksum just before the packet goes out on the wire, instead of the operating system doing it earlier. The result is that NSM tools, which often capture the packet before the offloading happens, can see packets with incorrect or zeroed-out checksums, like 0x00000, even though the packet that actually traveled the network is perfectly fine. Now, mature NSM platforms like Security Onion usually configure the network interfaces correctly during setup to avoid this problem, but it's a super common point of confusion for analysts starting out. They see bad checksums and might waste time investigating errors that aren't really there.
Okay, so technical hurdles like proxies and checksums need careful handling. But beyond the tech, the book's title emphasizes the practice of NSM, not just the tools. How do organizations move beyond just deploying sensors and actually build a truly resilient incident response capability?
That's such a critical point. Effective incident response isn't just a technical task you do when an alarm goes off. It needs to be a continuous business process. It fits into that broader enterprise security cycle: planning, resistance, detection, and response. NSM is obviously key for enhancing detection and response, and the NSM process itself has its own workflow: collection, analysis, escalation, resolution. But on collection, it's vital to remember it's not just about logs and packets from your sensors. The Mandiant M-Trends report, year after year, finds that a huge chunk, often like 2/3 of intrusions, are first flagged by external parties: a customer, a partner, law enforcement. So the crucial question for you is, are you actually prepared to receive and act on a warning about a breach from outside your own organization? Do you have a process for that?
That's a sobering thought, relying on others to tell you you've been breached. Okay, so collection is broad. What about analysis? How do teams effectively process all this information once collected?
Analysis is really about sifting through the data to identify and validate activity, figuring out what's normal, what's just suspicious, and what's actively malicious. There are broadly two approaches analysts take. One is IOC-centric analysis, which you could call matching. Here you're comparing the evidence you see: IPs, domains, file hashes, etc., against known indicators of compromise. Think lists of badness, like the thousands of IOCs Mandiant published in their famous APT1 report detailing one specific threat actor group. The other approach is IOC-free analysis, often called hunting. This is more proactive. Skilled analysts search through the data looking for anomalies, for signs of new or unknown adversary techniques, without relying on predefined signatures or indicators. And when you find something, incident classification becomes vital. You need internally consistent definitions for what constitutes an intrusion versus just an incident. What's the severity? Using community standards like VIRUS, the vocabulary for event recording, and incident sharing is really helpful here for documenting things clearly and consistently.
Okay, so analyze using known badness and also hunt for the unknown, then classify consistently. What happens once an incident is confirmed and classified? What are the next crucial steps?
Then comes escalation. And this is often where things get, well, difficult politically or procedurally within an organization. It involves properly documenting the incident. Assigning a single, unique incident number per victim system is really important for tracking. It involves notifying the right stakeholders, system owners, legal, management, maybe PR, and critically, getting acknowledgement that they've received the notification. You'd be surprised how often poor asset inventory management, just not knowing who owns the system, becomes a major roadblock right here. Finally, there's resolution. The goal here is to take those compromised systems from their current at-risk state back to a trustworthy state. This involves containment strategies, eradication, recovery, often guided by predefined playbooks that standardize the response based on the threat or the asset involved. You need clear guidelines.
It definitely sounds like a structured process with a lot of moving parts involving tech, process, and people. So, thinking about the people, how does an organization justify building and then structure a dedicated computer incident response team, a CR?
Ultimately, the justification for investing in or expanding a CERT often comes down to tracking and reporting on two key metrics. First, the classification and the sheer count of incidents you're actually experiencing. Are they going up? Are they severe? Second, the time it takes you, on average, to get from detecting an incident to fully containing it. That's your mean time to contain, or MTTC. If management isn't happy with those numbers, if incidents are frequent, severe, or take too long to handle, that's your business case right there for a stronger CERT. As for structure, a common model includes a director of incident response overseeing everything. Then maybe an incident detection and response IDR center, which might have different tiers of analysts. Event analysts doing more IOC matching, incident analysts doing matching and some hunting, and senior incident handlers leading investigations and complex hunts. And often alongside that, an applied threat intelligence ATI center, providing context on adversaries, feeding IOCs, and maybe even running adversary simulation exercises. It's about having specialized skills focused on finding and fighting the threats.
Wow. Okay, so today we've really taken a deep dive into network security monitoring, using Richard Bettlich's The Practice of Network Security Monitoring as our guide. We've talked about why just trying to prevent attacks isn't enough anymore. We've explored that rich tapestry of different NSM data types from full packets to alerts. We saw how tools like Security Onion can bring all that together, making it practical to deploy. And those attack scenarios really showed NSM in action, didn't they? Unraveling both server-side and client-side compromises. We also touched on some of those tricky real-world challenges like proxies and checksums, and crucially, the importance of NSM not just as tech, but as a practice building that robust, metrics-driven incident response capability and team.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating, I think, is that NSM really isn't just a collection of technologies. It's fundamentally a philosophy. It's a continuous business process. That core idea, knowing that intrusions are inevitable, it completely shifts your focus. It moves you from worrying if you'll get hit to focusing on when you get hit, how quickly can you detect it, and how effectively can you respond. NSM gives you the visibility to actually do that.
So here's something to really chew on. If your organization doesn't actually know how many intrusions it suffered last quarter, or if you don't know how quickly, on average, you detected and contained them, then you're operating with a pretty significant blind spot, right? A blind spot that leaves you really vulnerable. What steps can you take, starting today maybe, to gain that crucial visibility, to truly start coping with the reality of constant compromise?